I'd like to call this meeting to order. If you could please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, there's one, well, I should start with who's in attendance, excuse me. So present this evening are myself, Mayor Morrow, Council members Gearboss, Simon Koenig, Rhodes, Roth, Tahar, and Dillon. From City staff, we have City Manager Campbell, Clerk Royal, Police Chief Rennick, and DPW Director Fordyce. There is one change to the agenda this evening. Mr. Roth would like to add an item under the discussion portion of our agenda regarding code enforcement, and he passed out earlier this evening a document, a spreadsheet that you should all have dated October the 9th. So that will be the last item under the discussion portion of the agenda this evening. If there are no other additions, corrections, or questions, I would seek a motion to approve the agenda as submitted.
So moved.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Rhodes. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilwoman Saline Koenig. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. The motion carries unanimously. We will dispense with excusing absences because there are none. So we come to our one and only presentation, which is the Saline Main Street Quarterly Report. And I believe we have our Main Street Director with us here this evening. Riley, the floor is yours.
Oh, there, I got to
Yep.
push the button on, sorry about that. Yeah, as you can see, our third quarter report from our update that you received. The third quarter is actually our busiest quarter of the year. We're very event heavy in that sense. From our promotion section, you can see that summer music series was happening every Thursday night in downtown. We also had the Mastodon race alongside the Celtic Festival, which actually was our highest attendance race ever. The addition of the family aspect to that really raised that event up high. Oktoberfest just completed. We estimated around 5,000 people were in town for that, and it was actually one of our more successful financial events also during this quarter. Our marketing and public relations group is continuing to work hard on marketing for our events next year alongside with the Michigan Avenue construction and from there. We also had with Summer Music Series, we had our first open mic night along with the Downtown Pep Rally also. Design, we did Be Blooming, had a great number of sponsors this year. Thank you to those on City Council that were a part of that event this year. And we actually completed Leather Bucket Alley festoon lighting, and actually those lights are lit right now, so hopefully if you guys have been able to get out there and check those out. It looks really great, and it's been received a lot of good responses from the community and from the business owners involved in it. Along with that, we worked with the design team on the streetscape for Michigan Avenue construction, and the same basically concepts that you guys discussed tonight. Our business development team has been working on a downtown parking work plan. As you know, Wally from Max Kitty and Seafood Shack, he's been heading that up, a part of our business development team, and we are continuing to work on a plan that hopefully will create more downtown parking and accessibility to the businesses. Our business retention work plan is in the process right now for 2016. It should be a pretty good work plan right now. We have a lot of workshops built into it for preparing for construction. And actually, one of our second workshops will be tomorrow on how to read your financial statements like a banker. It's at 9:30 a.m. at Maggiamo Italian Grill with all the businesses. We completed one that was about social media and marketing last month. And we got good responses with that, individual sessions with business owners also. As you can see, all this volunteer hours and all this work that's been going on this third quarter has actually totaled about 2,049 hours, and we value that volunteer hours at $22 an hour, which equals $45,078 in labor is what we estimate that we have accomplished in our third quarter in that sense. So as you can see from other quarters, this is our busiest and most productive quarter. So, any questions or any concerns?
Any questions for Riley? No?
Great, thank you. We look forward to working with you guys.
Thank you so much. Okay, we move on to citizen comments on agenda items. Under the Open Meetings Act, any citizen can come forward at this time and make comment or question to City Council on an item that, of course, appears on this agenda. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Anyone who would like to speak is requested but not required to state his or her name and address for the record. Are there any citizen comments? There are no citizen comments, and we'll proceed to the consent agenda. The following consent agenda will normally be adopted without discussion. However, at the request of any citizen or council member, any item may be removed from the consent agenda for council discussion. Is there a motion?
Move to approve as submitted.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Rhodes. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilwoman Dillon. All those in favor of approving the consent agenda as submitted signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. We move on to new business item 15-199. This is 2016 Community Event Waiver of Fees. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the September 30th, 2015 memo from Clerk Royal and to approve or not to approve the 2016 Community Event Waiver of Fees. Is there a motion?
Move to approve.
Thank you, Mr. Har. Is there a second?
I second.
Seconded.
Also want to add acknowledge to it and approve.
Yep, very good. And I'm assuming you also want to acknowledge receipt, Mr. Har.
Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. Well, of course, we discussed these events and the waiving of their fees and their overall cost at our last council work meeting 2 weeks ago. Does the clerk care to make any comment at this time?
No.
No? Are there any questions for the city clerk? Ms. Seibel-Koenig?
I do recall our discussion, and we did add, I see at the bottom, $1,000 for a possible new event. It's been brought up a couple times by different people along the way that maybe that is not, with Michigan Avenue construction and sort of having to rethink some of the events that go on, even some of the existing events, the costs may change, and that maybe $1,000 is not sufficient to consider. Just a thought.
Do you have a number in mind of what you think would be appropriate?
I guess maybe more like 5,000.
Okay. Well, how does the rest of council feel about that? Mr. Roth?
I'm happy the way it is. I think if that situation should arise, it can be brought in front of the council. We can make the exception at that time.
Okay. How does the rest of the group feel?
I agree.
Okay. I would be inclined to agree with that, Ms. Seibel-Koenig. However, I think this was noted at our last work meeting, I think what is likely to require additional support would be something related to the celebration of our sesquicentennial, and we do have a budget for that, and it's my anticipation that we have money in the subsequent fiscal year as well.
Very
So, okay. But thank you for bringing that up. Anything further on this? Any subsequent discussion? Mr. Rhodes?
I think it might be worthwhile for the audience and those watching to mention the total amount that the city is willing to expend to support these various community events. And the anticipated total cost if all these things were to happen is $25,600.
Very good. I think it should also be noted that obviously there are many people on this dais who are involved in a number of these events and activities, and these groups are really served and led by some amazing community volunteers who work tirelessly to keep costs down and make sure that they're spending money responsibly. So I think that needs to be noted for the record. If there's no subsequent discussion on this item, it's been properly moved by Tahar, seconded by Councilmember Roth, to acknowledge receipt and to approve. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. We move on to new business item 15-200, request to waive penalties and interest on a tax bill. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the September 30th, 2015 letter from City Treasurer Bennett and the request from Constant James requesting waiver of tax penalty and interest on real property taxes at 239 Marcana Court. Is there a motion?
I would move to acknowledge receipt and further to add that we approve this waiver.
Okay, so it's been moved by Mayor Pro Tem to acknowledge receipt and to approve the waiving of tax penalty and interest. Is that correct, Mr. Rhodes?
Yes, sir.
Okay, is there a second to that? Chair will ask again, is there a second? Then that motion dies for lack of a second. Is there now a motion to acknowledge receipt?
I'd like to acknowledge the receipt.
Thank you, Councilmember Roth. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Dillon. I know that Treasurer Bennett is not here this evening. Do you want to comment on this at all? It's pretty self-explanatory, but we'd welcome comments if you have them.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is an item where it was postmarked in time. However, you also may recall that there's been a long-standing city policy to no longer accept postmarks. And so unfortunately, the rule is what the rule is. So it does not, would still have to be assessed the late fees.
Questions for our city manager? Subsequent comments or discussion? Mayor Pro Tem Rhodes.
I would just say that if, in fact, council has the ability to waive late fees, then I don't know under what circumstances we would waive them if we don't for this purpose. Otherwise, we might as well not have the ability to waive fees if all we ever do is say no.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Are there additional comments? No? Then we'll proceed to vote. It's been properly moved by Roth, seconded by Dillon to acknowledge receipt. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. The motion carries unanimously. If there's nothing further, we move on to new business item 15-201. This is short-term repairs at Merchant Plaza proposal. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the October 16th, 2015 memo from City Manager Campbell and to approve or not to approve the short-term repairs at Merchant Plaza in the amount of $7,340. Is there a motion?
I'll move to acknowledge the receipt for discussion.
All right, thank you, Mr. Gearboss. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilwoman Dillon. Mr. Campbell, the floor is yours, and, DPW Director Fordyce would also like to comment. We would welcome him to the podium as well. After your comments, we'll open it up for questions.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Jeff, if you want to come on up too. As we talked about pushing this project back until, at least until after, or at least for the long term, let me preface that by the long-term improvements at Merchant Plaza, that we would push this back after the Michigan Ave project that will begin in the spring of 2016. Wanted to do some short-term repairs to alleviate the pedestrian, or to make sure it is pedestrian safe, and to make sure that it's kept in good order. So this is what we've proposed. Mr. Fordyce and I proposing this to do some fairly minor improvements to get us through the next couple seasons. So, Jeff, if you wanted to maybe elaborate on your proposal.
Yeah, this basically is the simplest repair scenario that I could put together that would ensure pedestrian safety in this area. It's essentially just 5-foot or 6-foot sidewalks, replacing some of the broken curbing and the ADA ramp at parking lot 1, and then walkway leading through the park, connecting to the back of Mr. Kinley's building, and then connecting to the stairway into the alley behind Dan's Tavern, and also connecting on the north side of the Oxygen Plus building to the walkway along there and the little set of steps that are there. So this would replace the walking surfaces with a much smaller walking surface, but it would be smooth and level. We'd have to do some root removal, but not take out those 3 trees at this point. And then other things that would remain would be the dumpster corral would stay where it is, and the existing low retaining wall around the planting bed that is in some disrepair, that would remain until further design and decisions have been made for this space. So it's an inexpensive, reasonably inexpensive stopgap measure that will make the area safe.
Very good. Any additional comments, Mr. Campbell?
No, sir.
Thank you, gentlemen. All right, let's begin with questions. I'll actually begin down here at this end of the dais. I don't mean to put you on the spot, Ms. Seibel-Koenig. Any questions for our DPW Director or City Manager?
Not at this time.
Thank you, ma'am. Councilmember Gearbaugh?
No, not really. I think the issue is we'll probably just, get 2 seasons out of this until we figure out what we're actually going to do with it? Or...
I mean, the way this will be constructed, some of it depends a little bit on the tree roots and how much removal we do there, but there'll be full-fledged sidewalks, so they should last longer than 2 seasons, but it certainly will get us through.
The idea is still to get us through for
Yeah.
how many?
Yeah, a minimal effort to make it safe until we can figure out a grander plan.
Thank you, Councilmember. Mayor Pro Tem Rhodes?
There are, I believe, 1 or 2 benches down there now. Would those remain?
There's 1 bench down there right now, and I think we could place that in what I'm proposing as a mulch bed. between the two trees. I think that bench is a little bit ragged, but it does see use.
Serviceable.
Yeah, it's serviceable. So that would be my suggestion, is just kind of tuck it right next to the edge of the sidewalk in the mulch bed.
Okay, that'd be fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Councilmember Tahar?
Yes, thank you. I noticed you mentioned leaving the drainage unchanged except for a small swale. Are you relatively confident that will take care of the drainage issues that we've seen up until now?
Yeah, it's not the best solution, but I think it will be able to manage the flow from those roof drains that come off of the downtown diner building, get that into that catch basin. Now, I'll put a caveat on that when we get out there and we start tearing things apart, we might find something that needs to be repaired underground to make sure that drainage continues. But I think in the general scope, if we can make sure that those roof drains get directed towards the existing catch basin, that we won't have any icing problems.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Tahar. Mr. Roth?
There are two or three lights out there on the poles. Are they going to remain intact?
Those will remain for this phase.
And the concrete that's based on that whole strip, what they're placed on, remain intact?
The strips of concrete between the brick paver areas, that will come out, but the pole foundations will remain.
Okay, so the lights will stay as it is?
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Roth. Ms. Dillon?
Can you just clarify the blue scribble marks on the drawing? Like over by the dumpster, what are those two squares now?
So I was basing this sketch was based on one of the plans for the park. So the dumpster corral had been removed in the base drawing, so that those couple of squares there is just me roughly sketching
That's
back
putting
in
back
the
in there.
dumpster corral, yeah.
What are the three pluses
Those are
along
the-
where it says mulch?
Those are the trees.
Those are current trees?
Yep.
And then over on the other side, does that mean it's approximately 65 feet? Is that what that says?
Yes.
And then what's is that a drain?
The little
down there?
hashtag with a circle around it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the existing catch,
downspout?
that's the existing catch basin that's out there.
Okay.
Anything else, Ms. Dillon?
What would the cost be to rip out that concrete if we decide to do something else?
To remove this sidewalk?
Yes.
Maybe $1,500, $2,000.
Okay. That's all I have.
Thank you, ma'am. Any additional questions or comments? No? If there's no discussion, then let's proceed to vote with what I believe to be the first of two motions. There's a motion on the floor moved by Gearboss, seconded by Dillon, to acknowledge receipt of the October 16th, 2015 memo from City Manager Campbell. All those in favor of acknowledging receipt signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. And at this time, the chair would entertain a motion to approve or to not approve the short-term repairs to Merchant Plaza in the amount of $7,340.
Move to approve.
Thank you, Councilmember Gearboss. Is there a second?
Second?
Seconded by Councilwoman Cybo Koenig. Any discussion? Ms. Tahar?
Regarding the dollar amount limit, if further work is needed, for example, for drainage, would we have to come back and approve more funding, or is this flexible enough? I know it's hard to foresee.
This budget figure here doesn't include anything other than grading a little swale in there. So if there were repairs needed underground, that would be an additional cost. I think I think there's an administrative mechanism where we can expand an approved amount by
10%.
10%.
So,
If I may.
Please.
My concern is that a need to come back for approval for additional funds not delay the completion of this before construction season is over.
Which is getting really close, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
You feel reasonably comfortable with the amount that's enumerated in the motion?
well, again, that wouldn't cover any drainage repairs. So if, I don't know if you wanted to toss in an additional 1,500 if necessary for drainage repairs into the motion, that would, I think, more than cover us and prevent having to come back and get further approval.
Anything further, Mr. Har?
That's it.
No? Mr. Roth?
I have a couple questions. One, if this is approved, when would the action take place? How soon?
As soon as possible. I mean, we're running out of construction season, but I will have to put together a quick RFP and get quotes from 3 vendors.
Yeah, I want to share my thoughts about any drainage problems. I feel it's really wrong for the citizens of Saline to pay for drainage problems that's part of personal property that belongs to Mr. Kinley. I think we're definitely, if there's a drainage problem and needs to be repaired, it should be at his expense, not the city's expense, the taxpayer's expense. So I think very, very strong on that, and I'd be opposed to adding any extra dollars to that, even if the 10% extra.
Thank you, Mr. Roth. Any additional comments? Mr. Gearbaugh?
Isn't the drainage that's there now or the setup, we created it when we built it?
The underground portion, I believe, was installed with the initial Merchant Park development.
So really, were we repairing what we put in?
What I don't know is that, how those roof drains were originally handled. They've been modified since the first installation, so I don't know if that was, the original system was part of the park that then subsequently failed and was modified, or, that detail I'm not clear on. But yeah, the underground part was
Okay.
almost certainly part of the
So
original.
it's kind of a combination. We don't know really whose it is, but we're the ones having to take care of it,
Yeah.
so.
Because it's our sidewalk that's getting icy.
Yep.
Any additional comments? Subsequent discussion? No, then it's been properly, we'll proceed to vote then. It's been properly moved by Gearboss, seconded by Cybo Koenig to approve the short-term repairs to Merchant Park in the amount of $7,340. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. Thank you, gentlemen, appreciate your work on this. We move on to the discussion portion of our agenda, commission, committee, and task force reports from council members. That's easy. I'm sorry, Mr. Roth, my apologies.
I want to give a task force report for the sesquicentennial. We're going to have a joint subcommittee and the task force meeting on March 18th, 7 p.m. And it probably will probably be in this
November.
November.
Yeah.
Right, got the right month.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt.
Right. Thanks for the correction.
Any other commission, committee, or task force reports? How about reports or other announcements? I know Mr. Rhodes has at least one exciting one.
Yeah, thank you. Actually have 3. Some are not quite as exciting as this one, but I wanted to announce that the Henny Field lighting campaign exceeded its goal. We needed to raise $35,000 locally in order to receive a $35,000 match. We actually raised $37,430. So my thanks to all of you who contributed to the campaign. And we are going to make our best effort to get the lights installed before deep freeze sets in and the ground freezes. So hopefully we'll have them up before early December. So that was one item. The next one is the River Raisin Watershed Council will have their annual meeting this Thursday in Adrian. And I plan to attend that as a representative from the city of Saline. And then the last item that I wanted to mention is there continues to be some dialogue between the city of Saline, city of Milan, York Township, and Saline Township about the possibility of creating a preserve on the property which was formerly known as the Charlie Bird property, corner of Saline Milan Road and South Maple. And subsequent action would be to create a nonprofit which would then seek grants and other funds to make the Saline River navigable from City of Saline, Curtis Park specifically, down to City of Milan. And so there's dialogue going on about that, and hopefully within the next month or 6 weeks, we'll we'll have an action item.
I'm hopeful next council agenda, so on the 9th.
Okay.
Any other reports or announcements? Mr. Hart, please.
Yes, I would just mention that Planning Commission Chair Jack Seo and I recently attended the 2015 awards banquet of the Michigan chapter of the American Planning Association, because Saline was honored as a 37-year member of that organization.
Yeah. Actually, that's the next item on the discussion portion of the agenda. But yes, we appreciate you attending that, as well as Chairperson Seo. It was nice to be recognized. If there are no additional reports or announcements, I just have one, and I'm looking for consensus, and if there's no objection, then we'll proceed. But those of you who would have been following council or who were members of council back in 2013 will recall that we had a brief reception for our community's veterans in advance of our first meeting in November. And I had meant to do something similar in 2014, and for whatever reason, just did not. But I would like to do that again. I would donate the punch and some desserts and probably a cake, and prepare a press release encouraging community vets to come to a reception, and then recognize them at the beginning of our meeting. And of course, I would do that at the first meeting in November, because just 2 days later is of course Veterans Day. So if there's no objection to that, I will plan and coordinate that. I did speak to our city treasurer this past week. You'll recall that we have a work meeting scheduled on the 9th at 6:30. What I'd like to propose is that we bump it to 6. Mickey Joe and I think that our discussion will occupy about an hour, which means that we'll conclude around 7 o'clock, and that we would have a reception from about 7 to 7:30. So if there's no objections to that, that's the way I would like to proceed. And again, it's
Sounds good to me.
you, okay, and of course, if you know veterans in this community, I would encourage you to invite them to that reception. That will be on the 9th then at 7 p.m. here in council chambers. And like I said, I'll prepare a press release, and we'll put something out on social media as well. All right, if there are no additional announcements, and Mr. Hart took care of acknowledging the award we received from the Michigan Association of Planning, the last item on the agenda this evening is code enforcement, and of course, Mr. Roth distributed a memo dated the 9th of this month. Mr. Roth, do you care to comment on this at all, sir?
I will. I think it's fairly well explanatory by itself. Some time back, I asked the city manager to give me the information that was reported about the parking enforcement done by the local police department, and it gave the number of hours and minutes and days and so on, and gives the totals at the end and the averages. So it looks like that the average site, or as far as time that's worked, you take a look at it, it's not that much in hours and so on. If you add all those things together, as far as it says, spent average of 38 minutes per day for enforcing a parking, and 38 minutes times 6 days, if you're going for part-time work, figuring out working Saturdays enforcing the parking, only equals 228 minutes per week, Monday through Saturday. That's about 4 3/4 hours per week. I think that it's not wise hiring a part-time code enforcement officer where our police department can do that at no additional cost to the city as far as with their time that's spent. It does not need to be their top priority. As far as doing things, public safety will definitely come first, and when they have time, I think they have enough officers to cover such a thing, and there's a little bit of time that was spent for working this really didn't inhibit as far as our public safety. It actually made our officers more visible in being on the streets. So I think that we need not make the expenditure where it was in the present budget as far as hiring a part-time enforcement officers. I think we need to be conscientious of how much money we're spending. And if the other duties supersede this, I think that needs to be considered what they might be too.
Any comments, questions? Mr. Rhodes?
As I recall from our previous conversations, the potential hiring of a part-time code enforcement officer was not primarily for parking enforcement at all. but for many of the other smaller violations that continue to occur around our community that our present individual doesn't have time to get to because the building side of it has picked up so much. And that if the part-time code enforcement officer had any time available to do parking enforcement, then he or she could do that, and their compensation rate would be much less than what a police officer's compensation rate is. So that's why I supported the part-time code enforcement.
Well, and let me echo those comments, Mayor Pro Tem, and I'll preface by saying my comments are in no way disrespectful to the Building and Engineering Department and/or the individual who currently is responsible for code enforcement. Far from it. I do think that this city deserves a standalone code enforcement officer, and I think as we proceed into 2016, 2017, it may become necessary to have a full-time code enforcement officer again. I think that over the past many years, since that position was eliminated, a number of things have fallen through the cracks. Citing property owners for lawns that have not been mowed, snow removal, issues regarding temporary signs. I think we need to respond much more promptly to inquiries that the city receives via see-click fix. I think a code enforcement officer has a direct impact on the community's quality of life. And so I agree wholeheartedly with what Mayor Pro Tem Rhodes said. I do personally think that when we get a part-time code enforcement officer, part of his or her responsibilities should be some parking enforcement in our downtown lots, but that's not the primary reason why I supported its inclusion in our current budget. Please, Mr. Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There was during the, I believe it was back during the budget discussions when talking about bringing back the code enforcement in a part-time capacity, the discussion, as brief as it was as staff understood it, was to make the parking enforcement as part of the job description for the part-time. So if that's and that would be fine, but that was staff's understanding of the direction of council. But if the consensus is to not include that as a part of the job description, then we're happy to remove that.
Anything further on this? No? Okay. We can, of course, revisit it again in the future.
So, I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor. So is the direction to?
I'm not hearing any. I'm hearing one person who is inclined to move in a different direction. I'm hearing the status quo. We're not hearing any comments from the rest of the dais, which would lead me to believe that the status quo will be maintained.
I'd like to comment if I may.
My understanding was that our city manager was looking for reaffirmation that parking was or was not going to be part of the code enforcement person's office.
So the current description that was essentially not approved, but created, would include that the code enforcement officer, when he or she is hired, they would be primarily responsible for parking enforcement in our downtown.
Correct. That is staff's understanding, and that's what's in the current job description.
So I'm comfortable with the current job description. I assume, Mayor Pro Tem, you're comfortable with the current job description?
I got a question. You said primarily, and you just explained before that it could be a part of it. So you got two different things going on as far as consensus goes. You just had mentioned when you gave the summary that the code enforcement officer's primary responsibility be parking enforcement. I thought you said other codes before. So there's a difference between primary and it's a difference between.
Well, you asked me a question, let me answer
yes.
it. If I misspoke, I apologize. But to my earlier point, when we hire a code enforcement officer, he or she should be responsible for a number of things. The current description includes parking enforcement, but it doesn't exclude the other things that I previously mentioned, including snow removal, mowing of lawns, temporary signs, responding promptly to inquiries on a see-click fix. So, yes, the current description includes parking enforcement, but it's not limited to exclusively parking enforcement.
That's the clarification. Kind of just previous to that, you said primary.
Okay.
And
Well,
I
if
totally
misspoke,
agree.
I apologize.
totally agree with far as what the code enforcement officer can do. But I don't see where it needs to be a primary responsibility to take care of parking. That can be well handled by our police department.
Mayor Pro Tem, you're comfortable with the current description, correct?
Yeah, I am, and I probably could have been a little more clear in my original comments also.
Councilmember Gearba?
Yeah, Mr. Roth did hear it as primary, and I agree with him. I just want to make sure that the primary, the majority of it is to deal with code enforcement. Parking comes secondary as it as it's needed.
Okay.
Also, I concur.
Okay. Ms. Tar?
Yes, I agree with Mr. Gearba.
Okay. Ms. Dillon?
I agree with Mr. Gearba.
Okay. Very good. You clear on that then?
Yes.
Okay. Very good. Any other discussion items that need to be brought forward this evening? No? Then we'll proceed to our second public comment period. Under the Open Meetings Act, any citizen may come forward at this time to make comment or question to City Council. This public comment period will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Anyone who would like to speak is requested but not required to state his or her name and address for the record. Are there any citizen comments?
Mayor, there was a sheet on the front desk talking about a public hearing at Liberty School regarding,
Oh, regarding the master plan. Do you want to touch on that briefly? I'm sorry, Mrs. Hess, do you have additional comments that you'd like to
no,
share
no,
this evening?
it was
Just
bringing that up because there's been nothing
No, I
on
appreciate that.
Facebook or nothing at all regarding that.
Okay, thank you. Let me just ask one last time, though, if there's any additional citizen comments? No? Do you want to talk about the public open house we're having?
Sure
Thank you
thing.
for reminding us, Mrs. Hess.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I believe I know it's on the front page of the city website, and I believe it's been being pushed out for social media, but it's a public work session, work meeting, similar to what we had about 5 years ago, where we combined the review of our master land use plan, our Parks and Rec plan, and our non-motorized pathway master plan. Carlisle Wortman, the city's planning consultant, they will lead the meeting and talk about what our current plans reflect, and to see if there's any changes that are wanted or necessary. And that's part of the public input, public participation portion of the process. These documents will go before the various boards, such as the Planning Commission, the Parks Commission, the City Council. I would encourage everybody to come and join, and what I like about this is that there's a little bit of crossover, but you have 3 different groups of people that have priorities and passions about those items, and so it's usually a great cross-section of folks in their thoughts and opinions, so we certainly invite everybody to come out. It's Tuesday, October 27th, 6:30, 6:30 at Liberty School.
8:30. 6:30 to 8:30.
6:30, correct, 6:30 to 8:30. So,
Can we make sure there's something on the city's website and that we disseminate that through social media if we haven't already?
it already is on the website, yep, and yeah.
So again, next Tuesday, 6:30 at Liberty School. Hope everyone can make it. Ms. Dillon?
Just for clarification, I think what's confusing people is that it's going out on social media being called a land use and recreation community engagement meeting. On the city stuff, it's called the master plan open house. And I think that's where there's confusion, that they're the same event, but they're being called 2 different things.
Okay, we will make sure we reference that. We tried to spice it up a little bit by not calling it master plan land use, but yes, we will reference that to make sure that we don't want to confuse anybody.
Anything else to be brought before Saline City Council this evening? All right, well then, please note the change that we have a work meeting then at 6 p.m. on the 9th, which will conclude around 7. A brief ceremony for our community veterans at 7, and a regular meeting at 7:30. And then we have a regular council meeting again at 7:30 p.m. on the 16th of November. Again, there are no absences this evening, so we'll dispense with that. So at this time, the chair would seek a motion to adjourn at 8:10 PM.
So moved?
Thank you, Mr. Gearboss. Is there a second?
Second?
Seconded by Councilwoman Dillon. All those in favor of adjourning signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. This meeting is adjourned. Got